Hi, everybody. The purpose of this mini lecture is to focus on populism. And I want you to start with a little bit of a thought process here. What would, if you would to run for an elected office, say running for president this year? I want you to take a piece of paper and just write down what are the top three problems that you think our country now deals with and that you would like to be solved as quickly as possible, obviously, right? So just, stop this mini lecture for a minute and write down the top three problems that you identify in the country, and then take further two steps and answer the next two questions. And then, in relationship to those problems you identified, who is to blame? Why are we in this problem? Are we having this problem? And then what would you do the same as the government or anybody else is currently doing, or what would you do differently? And I want you to do this exercise because that is hopefully something that every candidate does. Now, we are we tend to be better at identifying problems and identifying what needs to be fixed or what we would like to be fixed. And we are also pretty good at blaming things, right? There's a lot of illegal immigrants in the country. The government is to blame because they're not protecting the borders. Okay, what's your solution? Some people may say, reform our immigration process. Some people may say, tighten up border security, or build a wall. Let's build a wall, as President Trump used to say and promise. Right? If there's a problem, the border is open, close the border, move on. Right? So I want you to do that thought exercise and come up and see how many of those problems do you think have simple solutions, such as you don't want immigrants in the country, just build the wall, they won't come in. After you're done with this exercise, you can continue on to listen, and we'll get back to those items later on. So let's talk a little bit about populism. Populism, generally speaking, is this attempt to dismantle the system, which is usually identified as the corrupt elite, and to break the existing institutions. And whatever it is that a populist leader does, they usually promise that they will protect the interest of the people over the elite, right? So the elite is separated from the people, which means, working class or daily people, voters, whoever you want to plug in there, but not those in power or those who make decisions right now. So arguably, a populist leader will identify whatever is going on right now and whatever problems we have right now as being blamed on whoever is in power and the corrupt elite, and that in order to solve those problems, what we basically need is to break the existing institutions and bring back the people. Now, another thing to remember about populism, we just talked about ideologies. Populism is not an ideology, it's a method, it's a political performance. It's this idea that we can deliver for the people, and we're using that message as delivering to the people as a way to get into power. It is common in democracy, and it is also common in other forms of government as well. Now, let me just go back for a minute here. Um, and we can move on to talk about specifically about modern populism. So where does modern populism come from? we need to look at the promise of liberal democracy, this idea of, we the people, this idea of the government is there to serve the people. So the promise of that is that, sure, we live in diverse communities where society has many divisions and groups and, for lack of a better expression, tribes or tribal connections in it. But that at the end of the day, a lot of that overlap, or we can find those overlapping things. So it doesn't matter, for example, if we look about different races, we can put aside our differences in race and focus on we're all working class, for example, right? So there are different groupings, but there's also a lot of overlapping and creation of those political communities. Now, we do know that the groups, most groups who decide to live in a country and serve the people, they try to work on solutions and compromises, finding the common ground, serving everybody. And then in democracy, we rely on some things such as constitutions and the rule of law, protection of minority rights, which in theory are supposed to bring stability and supposed to bring good life or better life for everybody. But in reality, things are a little bit different. And especially in modern liberal democracies, we see um, the evolution of an economic gap, this very, very big inequality. In a country like the United States, the very rich are so much richer than the poor that while in theory we may believe we can catch up, there really isn't any place to catch up. So the economic gap is large and it's growing. And because of that, groups find themselves, instead of working together on common problem solving, pitted against each other. Because the way to solve or address a lot of those problems is to um, hurt or take or distribute or redistribute the resources between all of those different groups. And if there's not a lot of willingness for compromise, then we end up with some sort of conflict. It doesn't have to be, people shooting each other in the streets, but we are in conflict over resources, over what we do with the resources that we have, uh, how we tax, how we redistribute, what services the government give and doesn't give. All of those things are part of that. And then because of that, and because a lot of people feel that they are left out, they are looking for change. People are looking for change. And this is where populism comes in. So a populist leader comes in and promised a change. Promise all you need to do is elect me, get me into the government, and I'm telling you that I will solve all of those different problems. I will bring services back to you. I will make sure that you are getting treated and that your interests are being addressed. All you have to do is just elect me. Now, in modern populism and in modern populist leaders, the leader embodies the will of the people. The leader becomes the representative of that. So the idea is that there's no other way to address or to serve the interests of the people unless we elect that leader. And so everything else that has been serving democracy, or arguably has been serving democracy, such as the free press, the courts, the electoral rules, the constitutions, all of those things are being seen as perpetuating the power structure, the current power structure. And the only way, according to the promise of the populist leader, only way to break away is to break away all of those institutions. So for a true populist leader, um, we we should try and dismantle and take over a lot of those institutions. So we can question the courts or try to restructure them. We can question or not accept electoral rules or election outcomes. A constitution may be put out there in terms of should we change it? Should we accept it? Why is it still there after so many years, etc.? And things like free press or especially investigative journalism is really being looking down at because they ask hard questions and they don't buy into um, cheap promises. Now, the populist leader would then promise to overturn all of those institutions, and instead of that, promise that the new system, whatever will be created, will serve the people, will serve the, the country. We can see um, populist leaders rising from left and right. So ideology, in terms of ideology, we can see conservative populists, we can see liberal populists. It's just who they identify as the enemy or those that most need to be dismantled. If they come from the right, usually they look at the government elite and saying we need to replace everybody who's in government right now and those institutions, those agencies, um, those rules and norms and etc. And if the populist leader is coming from the left, usually he would look at businesses, corporate elites, money elites, and would pinpoint and say, what we need to do is to have a reform that takes money out of politics and that brings power, therefore, to the people, all of us, in an equal way, and not just for to the very, very rich. Here are some common traits for populist leaders. They tend to be charismatic. Like I said, they embody the public will. They speak for the people. They're making very, very large, sweeping promises, and I will give you some examples in a minute. But whatever they promise you, that will solve all the problems, that will change the system completely, and they're very good and specifically, intentionally demonize their opponents. And finally, populist leaders are not wedded to the truth. They can easily or would many times would spin the truth, would use half truths, or misinformation, disinformation, or sometimes just plain lying. At times, you see a populist leader rising and relying on the support of a religious group or religious entities, and if they do that, then that arguably gives them more power. Not only they speak for the people, they also enjoy a divine support. And then something that almost all populist leaders find out sooner or later is that this style, this performance, this political performance method is very, very good at being elected. People want to hear those promises because it's very easy to identify the problems and it's very easy to suggest the quote unquote simple solutions. The problem is that usually the devil is in the details, and once you try to really implement things, it's much harder because it's very easy or easier to get elected, specifically as a populist leader, and then it's much harder to govern and to deliver on those huge, big promises. And because of that impact, because of that disappointment, like I said, there's a problem. People are looking for change. Steps in the populist leader with all those huge, great promises about changing everything, delivering the system back to the people. They get elected, they get in office, and they fail because it's not easy to do all of those things that they promised. And then the disappointment comes in. And the impact of that, or the longer term impact, is things like we are getting used to and accepting things like manipulation of information, manipulation of the public and the public will, that it's okay to say whatever I want to as long as you get me into power, regardless of what it means to you. I'll promise anything, even if that means that you will be very disappointed later on. Manipulation of information and what is truth. We know we deal with that all the time right now. You open the internet, you can find a news story and some commentator that would support any position and opinion you want. How do you know what's true? How do you know who to trust? All of that is the impact that comes with um, populist leaders. And even if we now believe that we know who to trust and how to separate correct information from disinformation, if we fall into those promises and then get disappointed, the next time we will have even less trust in what we believe is the truth, less trust in law and order, less trust in our elected officials, etc. So a populist leader can promise, can get elected, but once they cannot deliver and the big disappointment, then we end up with this long-term huge impact on the whole system and the trust the people have in the whole democratic experience in the government as a whole or in the electoral system as a whole. So how does it look in practice? Populist movements in the United States started more or less at the end of the 1800s. Usually, there's an economic crisis that brings those in, but we are currently living through one cycle like that. So, former President Trump, who's now candidate, most likely going to be the nominee of the Republican Party again for the 2024 elections, is a populist leader. If you look at everything he says and you listen back to my mini lecture here, you see, right? He is talking about how we need to dismantle the government, drain the swamp in Washington, replace and change everything, do things for the people, make America great again. All of those promises. He's very strong and very adamantly demonizing all of his opponents, be them from the attorney general to obviously political candidates. You know, right now, Sleepy Joe in the 2016 elections when he was demonizing Hillary Clinton all the time. He's doing that now with President Biden, but with any other person. Governor, another elected official, any lawyer, any judge, anybody who's challenging them, anybody who challenges Trump or Trump friends or family will get, you know, tacked directly in many ways in a juvenile way, right? You can have criticism and disagreements between adults, elected officials, but between that and name calling in public, there's arguably should be a difference. But we are living through that. Arguably, all of that recent cycle started with the economic crisis of 2008, and which brought up, arguably resulted in the elections of Trump in 2016. And now we are again in those cycles of crisis, and with the pandemic and the post-pandemic recovery is very slow recovery, and that provides again for fertile ground of um, uh, populist statements. So if we look at that, the Tea Party, and then President Obama and Bernie Sanders, like I said, those the populists can come from right or from left. And if you listen to Bernie Sanders' messages and President Trump's messages in the election cycle, the 2016 election cycle, you can see that there's a lot of things that they say that are very, very similar to each other, especially about that, the power has been taken away from the people. If you just elect me, I'll bring it back to the people. So Trump represents right-wing populism, and his statements are very, very clear. The people are forgotten. The people are victimized by the government and the elites. The people are lied to, and then if we elect him, will change all of that. Now, arguably, we've been there with President Trump already, and in the 2020 elections, when he lost, we saw a lot of those things, a lot of the misinformation, the disinformation, and the direct challenge to the institutions that hold the country together, such as January 6th, or the whole idea that the elections were stolen and rigged, etc. And so it will be interesting to see how this message resonates again in this election cycle. Now look back at the piece of paper that you wrote on at the very beginning of this mini lecture and look at those of those problems that you identified, and who are you blaming, and what you think should be done different or should be done the same. And think about it in the context of populism again, and see how many of you actually would have, if trying to run for office, might have fall down in something that um, looks like populism. So, given those problems that you identified, and thinking, are you a populist or not, I would encourage you to visit this website or by the Guardian that has this question, this survey that will tell you how populist are you, and it has some names of notable leaders and how populist they are, and if they're populist right or left or non-populist, as you can see here. And there's a little survey here of 20 questions. It shouldn't take you more than 2-3 minutes to answer them, and it would then generate a result that will place you on this matrix. So I encourage you to go. You can just search for "Are you a populist?" And this is by The Guardian, the newspaper The Guardian. So if you use that, you can see, and keep in mind the little exercise you did at the beginning of this mini lecture, and all together come up and see, how much of a populist are you? I also want to make very, very clear that while populism is probably not good for democracy, it's something that we all probably practice, at least to some degree, and we are all somewhat likely to fall into from time to time. And so don't feel bad about it, regardless of what results you are getting here. Well, thank you for listening for this mini lecture about populism, and I will see you next time.